Did you know that the Boston Strangler's DNA was linked definitively to only one victim? I didn't. So basically, what I'm trying to say is what I thought that I knew previously about the story of the Boston Strangler, and I like to watch and listen to true crime stuff. I listen to true crime podcasts all the time. I watch true crime documentaries very often. I was always under the impression that Albert DeSalvo was, in fact, the Boston Strangler. And I'm not saying that he wasn't, because it's very possible that, yes, he was. But after having watched Boston Strangler, which is a new, inspired by true story, true crime drama on Hulu starring Keira Knightley, I did not realize how murky the whole story really was. And I know there was a lot that was probably left out because they can only put but so much into like an hour and a half, 2-hour movie, however long it was. I don't even remember. Maybe it wasn't 2 hours. But I thought that there was no question, that there was no doubt about Albert DeSalvo. But there were all these different little things involved in these different connections he had with different people that really makes you wonder if he truly was the only one who had committed these murders. And that was one of the big takeaways of this movie for me, that it kind of made me realize that there was a lot about this. I had no clue. Like I said, I was just always under the impression that he was the guy. Maybe he wasn't the only one. Anyway, okay, Boston Strangler stars Keira Knightley, and I can't remember the other chick who plays in here with her. I do remember that Chris Cooper is in here, and Polka Dot Guy from the Suicide Squad. He plays Albert DeSalvo. Anyway, it starts off by saying this movie is inspired by a true story, which of course means they have taken some liberties with the truth, I guess for purposes of dramatization. And so I went looking for stuff after I watched this to see what was true, what wasn't, what had been embellished or whatever. And I took some notes on that. I'll try to remember to get around to that. But basically what I wanted to talk about first was my impressions of this movie. Yeah, him. He's Chris Cooper, right? I'm terrible with names sometimes. I was generally impressed with the film. Like I said, I like true crime stuff, so I was immediately drawn to this as soon as I found out about it. And I started watching it last week, I think, and then I finished it up maybe yesterday or the day before. This is Tuesday as I record this. And one thing that jumped out at me right away that I was really impressed with was Keira Knightley's American accent, her dialect. She did a very good neutral American accent. She's supposed to be from Boston in here. I don't remember where she was born or grew up. It's like her character. But she didn't really do so much of a Boston accent as just a neutral American accent. She plays a reporter by the name of Loretta McLaughlin, who was an American journalist, author, newspaper editor. And I'll read you what I copied so that I can sort of just give you kind of like the clear-cut synopsis of this. As a journalist at the Boston Record-American, McLaughlin, along with Gene Harris, covered the Boston Strangler murders in 1962. She was, in fact, the first journalist to connect the murders and break the story about the serial killer. That was portrayed in here. That really happened. And it says in other stuff about her being appointed as editor. That's not really important for purposes of this story. So I was impressed by her grasp of the American dialect. There are a lot of times where people from the UK, and they often can do a really, really good job, but there are some times where it's obvious they don't have the best grasp on it that others do. I'll give you an example, Benedict Cumberbatch. To me, it was very obvious he was trying super hard to sound American when he was in Doctor Strange. Also, another film I recently rewatched, Silent Hill 2, I had totally forgotten that Kit Harington was in there, Jon Snow. Very obvious he was trying hard, sort of, but you could hear the UK, you could hear the Brit just come right on through every now and again. So I was like, so sometimes they can't do quite as good as others, but Keira did a really, really good job here. I was impressed enough that I wrote it down. I wrote, Keira Knightley accent impressive. Her voice sounds totally different. And she did not sound like herself at all. It's so amazing to me how the voice can change when people take on different dialects. She did not sound like Keira Knightley, but as I noted, she does not sound like a Bostonian, and she didn't. So the story shows events mostly from her perspective. It does show this girl right here. The character's name is Jean Harris, and they worked together on this story. And it starts off by showing Keira Knightley sort of, she's bored with doing like lifestyle type of stories for the paper. She wants to do something different. And so it presents her as embarking on this crusade to start working on this story. And her editor very reluctantly agrees to let her. That part was true, that the editor was reluctant to let her. Was not necessarily true that she had just started doing this true crime stuff at the beginning of the Boston Strangler. She had apparently been a seasoned crime reporter for 10 years. So that was a bit of embellishment, but I think the reason they did that was kind of to show things like the challenges that female journalists had back in the day. It was generally expected that they would do, sort of light, fluffy pieces of writing for the newspapers and not necessarily taken seriously. I do like how they balanced that reality that a lot of professional women in this type of field would have gone through without being, to me, terribly overbearing about it. There were plenty of male characters in here that were very open and receptive to these women reporters and the job that they were doing. So I like that they did not present all the men in here as complete tailholes or misogynists or whatever, like seems to be a very common thing these days. So that was something that I appreciated. Anyway, it shows the struggles that she faces in balancing her professional life with her marital life and the strain that it does take on her relationship with her family, or more specifically, her relationship with her husband, and the fact that she gets pulled away a lot and he's not completely on board with what it's doing to her and how it's taking her away from her family a lot. And so they don't shy away from the fact that caused issues. And in real life, they did end up getting divorced. I don't know how soon. I don't know in what time frame it was after the Boston Strangler stories were done, after that case was closed, but their relationship did come to an end. I don't know if it was completely as a result of this, because she had been doing true crime stuff for a while in real life. So I don't know how much of it was really directly because of her covering this case. What else? With regard to journalism, there was a quote that one of the characters in here made, and I wrote it down. I liked it because I thought it was cool, and I wish more journalists today would abide by this standard. We cover the news, we don't make it. And that was a perspective that I appreciated a lot. This detective right here, he apparently was not a true life person. He was an amalgamation of different police officers who had been receptive to speaking with these reporters about the case and, sort of, I guess, like sharing information and talking about different perspectives and things like that. So basically, like I indicated at the very beginning, at the end of this movie, I believe that's where I can't remember if it's like some text or whatever that they put up on the screen, that Albert DeSalvo's DNA was conclusively tied to, I think the victim's name was Mary Sullivan, the very last victim, but that Albert DeSalvo, he confessed to all these stranglings, but the patterns of the stranglings or the victim profile had changed pretty substantially from the first, I guess, 4 or 5 murders to the last ones that occurred. And so that does kind of leave you wondering, or questioning the fact that he really did all these. There were these other people, these other convicts that he was connected to, one of which had been pointed out in a lineup by one of the potential victims of, I can't remember what happened. Maybe she escaped, or anyway, she picked out one of these guys that had somehow been linked to DeSalvo. And so that just really makes you wonder, maybe there was more than one Boston Strangler, and maybe they were either working together or it just so happened that they knew each other. I don't know. It was weird. It was just eye-opening to see that this was one of the guys. It was eye-opening to see that there was just so much going on that I personally, maybe you guys, if you're super familiar with this case, maybe some of you already know a lot of the intricacies of this, but a lot, like, and that was another guy there too. There was a lot about this I had no clue about. So I'm still just kind of astounded at the lack of knowledge that probably a lot of people have about this case. I think a lot of folks just, when you think the Boston Strangler, you think Albert DeSalvo, and that really, honestly, might not necessarily be as clear-cut as we thought it was. So kind of going around to fact versus fiction, I already touched on one of them, which was that she was already a seasoned crime reporter. She wasn't doing fluff pieces right before she started working on this. Like, she may have still been doing them, but she was already doing crime stuff. She was, like I said, the first one to piece together the links in the different murders that had happened. She was also the one who came up with the name Boston Strangler. I think she also was the one who linked the murders to Albert DeSalvo even before his confession. Now, I believe in a documentary that I started watching about this, and doggone, I can't remember what the name. I'll put the link to it. It's for free here on YouTube. Boston Strangler Revisited. I think the detective, one of the detectives on the case, one of the main detectives, he does not indicate that she had anything to do with linking the murders to him. So I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know if she really did, if the detective really did, or if this movie's just trying to push the narrative that she did, or if she pushed the narrative in real life, or if the detective doesn't want to give her, I have no clue, but whatever. She was someone who liked murder mysteries, and she also liked psychology. So her mind in covering these cases was geared to look for patterns. And so that's probably why she started to pick up on the connections between the earlier cases and figure out that they were linked. And someone, I can't remember if it was like a documentary, yeah, maybe it was a documentary, had mentioned that she was an amateur profiler. And in real life, as they portray in the movie, she did consult with an expert on psychology and or criminal psychology. So that is portrayed in the film. That really happened in real life. She did have to push her editors to run the stories, like I mentioned. The authorities were upset at the level of detail that she was posting, or she and her partner were posting in the articles. I think that was presented in the story. There are also some other things that something else that was presented as a thing that happened in this movie that did not in fact happen was that it was not these two girls, or no, she's not the one, she's somebody else. It was not Loretta and this other girl she worked with. They were not the ones who figured out that DeSalvo had been released early during the time frame of one or more of the earlier murders. It is true that the women were treated sort of as stunts. In the early days of the articles that they printed, they had their pictures up on the, when it was showing who the writers were, it had their pictures. In the movie, that was presented as the newspaper just trying to use them as stunts to make more sales. Oh, we're showing these women reporters writing this, and hoping that it would make more sales. And that was a thing that really did happen. But tied to that, in the movie, they present this. See here, like their pictures. In the movie, they present that as being a vehicle that caused them to feel like they were in danger, but in reality it's not been verified that either one of the women felt like they were in danger or actually were in danger. So as you can see, there's some embellishment going on, but it didn't feel like it was hugely exaggerated. It felt like in general that the events portrayed in here were pretty realistic, and a lot of them are verifiable as things that actually did happen. And if you are interested in true crime type movies, like let's say Zodiac, this kind of reminded me a bit of Zodiac, though Zodiac was longer, it's a little bit more complex. If you like those types of films, you'll probably like watching something like this. It's not super fast paced. There's not a lot of action going on. There's only just a moment or two of some suspense with regard to the main character. They do show when some of the murders happen, but they don't go into great depth or detail. They just show this happened. So those could be considered moments of suspense or whatever, but this is mostly an investigative type of story, and I found it pretty interesting. I definitely don't regret watching it. It's not something that just stands out at me as just an amazing piece of work, but it was definitely worth the watch, and I appreciated it enough that I wanted to talk about it with you guys. In case you didn't know that it's available on Hulu, and it's a new release, and maybe you'd like to check it out. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to put links in the description of this review video when it goes up. Links to different articles that I checked out about, separating fact from fiction, what's true, what's not, and also a link to that documentary that came out, I think it was 2000, Boston Strangler Revisited. Maybe it's 2000, maybe it's I don't remember. Anyway, but it's a pretty lengthy documentary about it. I had not finished watching it before I filmed this, but I'll put a link to it for you guys. There was something else. Oh yes, something. Sorry. Something that I either had completely forgotten or did not know about at all was that F. Lee Bailey was DeSalvo's lawyer. I did not know that. So that was kind of like, oh wow, okay. Maybe I did know this during a true crime documentary I watched about the Boston Strangler many years ago, but it was kind of interesting to see that portrayed in here. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else, and I think it's time for me to wrap this up. Oh, no, there was one thing. There was one thing I actually did miss. There's a scene where she and this other reporter she's working with, they just walk right into a crime scene. They just walk right in. And I wrote down, they just let her walk into a crime scene? Question mark, question mark, question mark. I have no idea if that really happened, but that stood out to me because I was like, did they really let reporters just walk right into this scene? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. Anyway, okay, that's definitely it. I'm going to wrap this up for now, and we'll see you guys later. Adios.